All right, happy holidays and happy almost New Year. I can't believe we've made it through this year. It's been a crazy year. I actually had to take a slight hiatus from this channel from late November, where I broke my wrist, through, I don't know, January, February, somewhere in there. But I was like, no, I'm going to get laid back news on time. And then when I left my day job, I determined I will do it every Friday and not every other Friday. Thankfully, this show has managed to go Legal Friday every Friday throughout the rest of the year, even with me not here some of the time. Sometimes I turn black and have dreadlocks. People get very confused, but I like to keep them guessing. So my alter ego, Nate, may be coming on this episode later. He should be. We have a new person to close out the year. And from what I understand, Nick, I'm trying not to ruin it. Start off. You have a channel called Trial Watch. Yep. And it has a birthday tomorrow?
It has a birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday to your channel.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. 1 year as a content creator and a general screamer at bad prosecution kind of channel. And I'm having the best of times because I've been doing labor law for over 30 years. And that's if you're not bored now, go into labor law. You will get instantly bored. So this is so liberating, applying my kind of law to other situation, and since I'm Swedish, even to the US standards. So me and my audience learn together.
Well, in honor of your 1 year anniversary, the 1 year anniversary traditional gift is paper. So I'll be sending you a cease and desist later.
Oh, will it be the Jennifer Braun kind of cease and desist?
All right. Well, I'm going to be a little more polite than Kurt. And how about as a birthday gift and a New Year's gift to Nick, how about a subscription on his channel? You can find a link in the description. You click it, super easy. Just click down below if you're on YouTube. Click the link, boom. It'll take you to the channel. And let's see if we can bump his number up to the next 100 or two. And there's 313 of you watching. I'll try to remember later. That's the best birthday gift you can give a channel.
Yes. The likes, the subscribes, all your money. No, likes and subscribes. But
money's later. You get them in the door. I'm watching legal billing in process here. But all right, so let's open with really recent, I think is as of yesterday, in the dark of night or dark of morning, a certain house in Idaho was being demolished. And anytime things are done in the middle of the night and there's a controversy around a case, I kind of wonder. So typically on this show, Andrea has been wonderful about her Brian Koberger coverage. And she had a different take than I expected about the demolition of the house. My initial take was, are they covering something up here? What's going on? But I was very surprised. You wrote a well thought out tweet thread, Andrea, and could you tell us what your thoughts are and we can all discuss it?
Yeah, well, so first I was a little shocked, honestly, to see just how alarmed so many people were about this step being taken. And the main reason why is because nearly every single crime scene ever in the history of crime has been destroyed, or at least, not preserved before trial. It's not something that you typically do. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. But the main one that just kind of comes down to the bottom line, that's the situation in this case, is that you are talking about taking somebody's private property. And so that is a huge burden to be imposing on somebody who didn't have anything to do with the crime, somebody who, didn't contribute to it anyway. They just had the misfortune of happening to own the home where this situation took place. And so courts are very, very sensitive to that. They don't want to impose, unduly unreasonable costs on, somebody who didn't ask to be a participant in this process in the first place. So because of that, when it comes to seizing evidence for trial, especially when you're talking about real property, okay, so real property itself, like a house, it tends to not really have any evidentiary value in and of itself. And what I mean by that is the house itself doesn't prove anything. Like you don't need to go admit the house at trial. Like what is the house proving? The house is valuable because it contains evidence. And so you can go in and you can recover the DNA, you can recover the fingerprints, you can document, the distances between locations where things took place. You can do all that type of stuff. And that then becomes evidence at trial. But the house itself, like standing alone, you don't need the house to prove anything at all. It doesn't prove, whether he committed these murders or why he committed them or anything like that. So the process of preserving that type of evidence for trial is basically what we've been seeing happen for, the last year, really, in this case. We saw that right when Brian Kohberger was initially arrested, Ann Taylor had filed a motion back then to preserve the house in its condition. I think it was for like a month at that point in time, to give the defense an opportunity to go in and do their own investigation, which is fair because, until he's charged, they don't have access. They don't have any basis to be getting their own evidence and stuff. So that was taken care of. And, subsequently we've heard, okay, the original owner of the house was some landlord, and he donated the house to the University of Idaho. And the University of Idaho has been preparing for this demolition for quite some time. It was originally supposed to take place back in October. They delayed it at that point. But even at that time, the University of Idaho was advising the public that they have already gone through remediation procedures, abatement procedures and stuff to prepare this house for demolition. So everybody knows that this is coming. And so nobody has suggested there's any other use that they need the house for, that there's more evidence they haven't been able to get, that there's something else that they need this house to be able to prove something. So that nobody's filed a motion asking the court to order that this house be preserved until trial. Of course, we don't even know yet when the trial is going to be in this case. It's state just filed a motion as well asking for a trial date to be set. They're asking for summer of 2024, which is, roughly 6 to 8 months from now. Mm-hmm. To me, I think that's unlikely that they're going to get that. It seems probably too soon, just given the volume of how much technical evidence is involved in this case. It's going to take more time for the defense to process that, I believe. But in any event, let's say the trial is 6 months down the road, you're asking the court to order the university. You need to not do whatever you want with your own property, okay? You need to keep it in the condition it's in. You need to keep it safe, keep people out of it so that they're not breaking in and disturbing it. You need to keep it insured. You need to keep it operational with like utilities running and stuff like that so that it doesn't become a public nuisance. Oh, and by the way, you need to do all of this until we feel like, we're ready to go to trial, and then you can have your own property back. That's just not how America works. Like, I'm sorry. It's just, that's not how America works. Private property rights are extremely important. So they're not going to do that without some really significant need, some compelling need being shown for that house itself to need to be preserved. Nobody has raised any need at all, let alone something really significant. So for that reason, this really doesn't surprise me at all. And like I said, I was sort of shocked at the reaction to it. It's very perfectly normal course of events in my line of work. It's pretty much what I would expect things to happen. And so, that's.
Here's a good question
what happened?
From the chat. Were the house's acoustic properties documented?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know. We'll find out at trial.
Yeah. And just to go off of what Andrea just said, and it's all true. They tell jurors, don't go to the crime scene because things may have changed since you were there. Mm-hmm. And, trees can be grown. Like the neighbor could have built a building that's, 10 stories tall. So, yes, going to a crime scene alone doesn't always help. And in the instance where it has, it's generally meant to be more of for Nicholas Cruz. The school, well, the government owned the school, so it wasn't a big deal to keep it standing. And yes, they took the jury through that just to get them all riled up and want them to give them the death penalty. It wasn't actually to serve any other purpose. And generally speaking, when it comes to things like a lot of times, like, at least in my experience when I worked in a prosecutor's office, when there was like a chase and somebody fled police, we would get the jury view would be the route of the chase, and we would do it if it was a show like it was extremely long, or for example, if the person was flying through the streets of a town and they went back and forth in every neighborhood, we would show just like, look how crazy this was, or look where everything went. But typically going back to a scene itself doesn't really help too much for the jury to figure anything out.
Yeah, so, and courts often disallow it for that reason because it's not helpful, and not just it isn't helpful, it's potentially misleading if it's in a materially different condition than it was at the time. So you can draw completely the wrong conclusions from it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and it says a lot too. If the defense isn't objecting to it, it's generally not a big deal.
Yeah, nobody has objected to this, and that's a really important point too, because one of the concerns I've seen a lot of is concern, well, he's going to raise this on appeal. You know, this is going to be something that he's going to try to capitalize on. That is not going to happen, and there are two reasons why that is, and I'll tell you both of them. So first off, to appeal something, you have to have a decision that was made, that was appealed. You can't appeal a decision that was never made. You have to ask the judge to make a decision, and then if he rules against you, you can appeal that. So that's kind of the basis for that joke that you hear, like if you're a baby lawyer and you fall asleep during trial, when you wake up, the very first thing you say should be objection. That's because that's error preservation. That is like a basic component of trial practice. To get your case ready for appeal is when something wrong happens, you got to raise it immediately so that the judge has an opportunity to fix it. You do not get to lie in the weeds and try to sandbag the appellate court by pointing out all this stuff the trial court did wrong that you never asked the trial court to do right in the first place. So he didn't file a motion. There's nothing to appeal here. There's no ruling, releasing the house or something like that would create an appealable ruling. The second reason is because, at least in theory, you can raise almost any issue through the lens of ineffective assistance of counsel, right? My attorney messed up. My attorney should have asked the court to preserve this house because it contained critical evidence and, could have had a material effect on my trial. So the issue with ineffective assistance of counsel in this particular situation, you have to prove a couple of things. So first off, you cannot base that on strategic decision-making by your attorney. Attorneys make judgment calls all the time throughout the course of a case. You're expected to do that. That is literally your job. Like, that's why you're hired, because you have the training and the expertise to be able to make those kinds of judgment calls about, well, this isn't particularly high value, but the cost would be this, or just whatever the implications of that are going to be. You got to weigh all those stuff. There's always trade-offs in those types of decisions. So for ineffective assistance of counsel, you pretty much have to prove my attorney didn't know what they were doing, not my attorney made a judgment call that I disagreed with. As soon as the attorney has made a judgment call, it is almost insulated from being able to be challenged. We know that this is almost certainly a judgment call because we know Ann Taylor knows how to ask the court to preserve this property if she wants to do that, because she already did it once in this case. So it's not like she wasn't aware that this was an option. So very likely that they can point to a non-strategic basis for that decision. The second reason is you always have to prove prejudice with ineffective assistance of counsel. You have to prove that my attorney messing this up is the reason why I lost my case. So not only does whatever this particular problem is have to get weighed against all of the totality of the evidence that the state has presented in your case, and it has to be like the deciding factor, okay, the thing that tipped the scale in favor of, had the jury just known this, they would have acquitted me, they would not have convicted me. That's pretty rare, pretty rare pieces of evidence to get. But also, how are you even going to identify what that would be now that the house has been destroyed? Like, this is kind of the nature of the problem with these types of issues, is because your attorney didn't do it, you didn't get the information, the evidence that you would need to be able to show that this evidence is critical. So it creates this sort of circularity problem that leaves you without any sort of basis to be able to say, well, this is what we would have gotten. You don't know what you would have gotten because the house has been destroyed. So there's really not a good pathway here, in my perspective, for anything at all that would be like a viable post-conviction process for him to pursue relating to the demolition of this house.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in a second because I tweeted back at you, Andrea, to bring up something that Barnes had talked about, Robert Barnes. And it's funny, Sean, that you mentioned Nicholas Cruz, because that goes right into this side topic. And that's that some of these shootings that have occurred at schools, schools are torn down. And there are some circumstances that people want explored in those schools, like Uvalde, Sandy Hook. Like, did they have locks on the doors? Were the locks going the correct direction? Like, instead of being able to lock themselves in the classroom, the locks were on the outside, and they would lock the class, lock them in versus locking people out, things of that nature. But this is all of a sudden wiped out and gone. And ironically, even Alec Baldwin, I don't know if you know this, his father was the shooting coach at a high school. And when he was autopsied, he had literally lead poisoning. He had breathed in so much lead that could have been a contributing factor to his death. Coincidentally, they just tore that part of the high school down and they couldn't really investigate it. So that is kind of what came into my mind. And I also was thinking about your prior statements, Andrea, where there was some real concern about there's no DNA evidence on this guy, except, or should I say, minuscule DNA evidence whatsoever. And I guess in a weird way, maybe it's in his favor then. It's like, okay, couldn't find it in the house, and you're not going to find it now because it's gone.
Yeah, and I think to some extent, too, that just reflects how much processing this house has already gone through, with the volume of technicians and experts and other people who have come in and out. This let's just be real. This is no longer an immaculate crime scene. There's just going to be too many explanations for how, DNA could have been introduced into that scene after the fact at this point.
And the other thing is, even if you were to keep the house, to take a jury through it, when the DNA and all this forensic evidence is collected, they are cutting things out of that house. Like those blood samples, there's holes in the drywall. There's probably taking a Sawzall, cutting chunks out of the floor. The house is going to look like a plague of locusts came through anyway. And what's that going to, a jury's going to have to look at that and say, oh, but just pretend it's all here and pretend there's blood everywhere. Well, no, you can show them pictures of all that stuff. And when Brian goes to trial, they're going to bring in, like, I bet they will for the theatrical effect, these big pieces of the floor and the wall and whatever was just covered in blood because these people got stabbed. So, people tend to leak a lot when that happens.
No, I think that's a really good point. They're going to bring in so much of this stuff anyway, and they're going to create.
You could probably build a house with everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, wait until if they're doing all this fancy 3D FBI scanning stuff that we're hearing about. I mean, they're going to compile some pretty fancy looking exhibits for this trial. One of the things I saw kind of being a point of concern as well was, what if that stuff isn't admissible, for some reason? That again is something I would not be concerned with. Like, these are demonstrative exhibits. They're not meant to be like scientific analyses of different things going on there. They're just to give you the idea and to give you an impression. And so they don't have to be that accurate. Okay. Like, a demonstrative exhibit is frequently a police officer sitting on the stand, like sketching out on the fly, like some, random configuration of rooms and stuff like that as best as he can remember. Like, if that's good enough, like, trust me, what the FBI is doing here is going to be just fine for demonstrative evidence.
Yeah. Or even a good example, that's, when the forensic guy's like, I took this swab from what? That big piece of blood stuck over here next to me. Yeah.
My is because the Swedish system doesn't rely on jurors. We have a panel of a judge and layman judges at the lower level. And often defendants, when they go through appeal to the next level, they change lawyers. And those lawyers might have different approaches how to interpret certain evidence. And that's why, well, not like if anything happened on the street, you can preserve that. If anything happened in the woods, hard to preserve that. But when it's a closed crime scene, that is almost always preserved until after the lower court and the first appeal. Then it can be somewhat released. Now, in some cases, even as in the United States, both can stipulate, yes, everything that could be collected have been collected. We can always, because you don't cut out just the blood stain. You cut out 3 feet by 3 feet. So you can do all the testing around if you want to. So, but that was my initial, from my standpoint as a non-US. So hence my reaction.
It's an interesting thing that there seems to be a much higher yardstick in criminal court for ineffective assistance to counsel than there would be in a civil trial for malpractice. That if someone engages in malpractice, I think in a civil case, you might lose your case, but you can go after your attorney for malpractice, and it's probably a much lower yardstick. I've heard cases about in criminal court, someone like literally sleeping through the trial.
Yeah.
Like snoring in a trial. That's not ineffective assistance to counsel.
Yep.
That would certainly be a malpractice. That would almost certainly be a successful malpractice suit if it was a civil case. So it's an interesting thing that the yardstick is so different. And I guess you can understand it, because the relief that they're seeking, if it's money, well, okay, let's just dig into the lawyer's pocket. If it's let's have a brand new trial, criminal trial all over again, the courts are going to be loath to do that, especially if it's more than a day or two. So you can understand why that would be. You can understand why it results in a different yardstick. But
you can understand why the system's willing to protect itself against that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the fact of, it's just not fair to people. Well, no, this is the government protecting the government, because if we had to retry all the bad cases, the system would implode, and the system is trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
That's a cynical view of it.
No, it's a very good point. I mean, that's just the reality. That's literally the reason, is that there is case law that says the finality of judgments is like a extremely important priority in criminal cases. Not getting it right, okay, but just getting it done.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. It's a great pickup by you, Andrea. That phrase, which is something most litigators have heard, has nothing to do with justice. It's a matter of just like, we're done here.
We're done.
Yeah.
We're moving on.
Yeah, I mean, back in April, I covered the Alan Ford trial. 32-second opening statement, and the lawyer was nodding off during the state's opening statement. That wasn't ineffective counsel.
Yeah.
So the bar is really, really high.
The bar is really high, and especially when it comes to things like this that involve getting evidence, not getting evidence, calling witnesses, not calling witnesses, stuff like that. It's nearly impossible, just because so much of that is it's a judgment call that the attorney makes. So I've won some ineffective assistance cases on appeal, and uniformly when you win them, it's because of a legal mistake. It's because you presented this defense at trial, but you didn't ask the judge for the jury instruction that you would need for the jury to be able to evaluate your defense. That type of thing. There's just sort of an obvious connection between what the attorney did wrong and the client not getting a fair shake at trial. But
and when you
you didn't call my witness or whatever. No, that almost never works.
And even when you won those, you should have gone out and probably bought a lottery ticket, because that's still something the court was very likely could have said, yeah, he was guilty anyway. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was still on the back foot in those cases.
I think it's also worth noting that when it comes to criminal defense, the rights of the defendant are somewhat narrower than some people might think. So the defendant has the right to choose how to plead, guilty or not guilty. They have the right to decide to appeal. They have the right to decide whether there's a jury trial or not, although the state might need to also consent to that. And that's what there's probably one or two more that I'm missing, but it's a relatively short.
They get to decide whether
to testify. Whether to testify, that's right. Whether to offer testimony on their behalf, that's correct.
It's in the gray area whether they get to decide what the defense is.
Well, that's my point, right? I don't think they do. I don't think they do. I don't think they get the right to decide what the defense is, because that's a strategic and tactical consideration. So the lawyer's obligation is to further the client's interests. I always distinguish it between what and how, right? So the client decides what, the lawyer decides how. So it's like, I'd really prefer to be found not guilty. I'm like, okay, I understand the subjective. Okay, I want you to call this witness. No. I want you to ask this question. No. Right? So it's like I can perfectly ethically say no. And if I'm appointed counsel, they can't fire me. And there's reasons too. Like, I'm not necessarily just being a jackass about the thing, because the witness you might want me to call might be a very bad witness because they have all kinds of problems that are not really going to further me, or I'm going on a different theory of the case, right? I'm trying to pursue a different theory, and you're trying to push me somewhere that's going to confuse the jury, confuse the issues, or whatever. So, like, yeah, those are my calls. And then you get to the end, and maybe you're convicted, and you want to be like, oh, ineffective assistance. He didn't call my witness. He didn't go my theory. He didn't ask that question I want to be asked. The Court of Appeals is going to laugh in your face.
Are you guys familiar? I'm curious about this. I haven't heard of cases like this. Is there a civil suit that a criminal defendant can bring in when there's ineffective assistance counsel for malpractice? That could there be civil liability for a lawyer who really drops the ball but doesn't rise to the level of ineffective assistance counsel?
Well, so typically to pursue malpractice against a criminal defense attorney, you have to prove actual innocence. And so that's a real big barrier to a lot of people.
Fair enough.
That's impossible.
Otherwise, consider
that's
that
impossible.
Actual innocence, not simply not guilty.
Yeah.
Wow.
But you do have a few of the innocent project where the court then don't want to bring up the new DNA evidence. And that is because either the technology wasn't there to begin with because it's so long ago, or the defense attorney did not challenge that piece of evidence. So is there a slight possibility? Maybe, but the circumstances are on an individual cases kind of thing.
And that example is like the classic example of why these types of errors with ineffective assistance of counsel don't work. Like, so the example I would give that's kind of like what you're talking about is the West Memphis 3. Damian Eccles has been trying to get DNA testing done on some of this evidence for, a long time now, because his position is we are actually innocent. We were kind of compelled to plead guilty to misdemeanors to lower level offenses to be able to get our freedom. But this would be exonerating evidence. The state, of course, is like, no, we prefer that judgments be final. We don't care if they're right. So they're resisting that. Well, the problem is because the evidence wasn't tested in the first place and you have no mechanism to be able to test that evidence, you can't prove that evidence exonerates you. So the state has, set up the rules in a way that handcuffs you. It suggests, oh, you'll have this remedy, but then it doesn't provide you with any sort of mechanism that you would need to be able to go out and actually exercise that remedy.
Yeah, but at the risk of somewhat perhaps stating the obvious, the other end of the equation, I think, is worthy of being considered, because there is a point of finality, and then when should that come is debatable. But the alternative that the extreme alternative, I should say, that there is no finality, doesn't make any sense. You don't want people just always asking for new trials, always always raising issues. When will victims ever get peace? When will society ever get peace? If people are just allowed to bring things over and over and over again. So there is tension between these two goals, and is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, not proof beyond all doubt. So that by its own definition does inherently suggest that some people are going to be falsely convicted.
Let's jump to
that's sort of unavoidable at some level.
All right, let's jump to Nick. Has been covering a case that I've been wondering about, and we've actually talked about getting together for a while. And I'm just curious, because if I read the headlines, this individual has been convicted, he's guilty, and he's one of the worst people on the planet, and that would be Andrew Tate. Apparently, though, there may be more to what's going on, or maybe there's some results we need to wait for. Can you break down what the case is, Nick, overall, and if there's any kind of crazy developments?
Okay, the Andrew Tate case is more or less a year old now. It started with just a day after the Twitter interaction between Andrew Tate and Greta Thunberg. They raided his house, and the Romanian authorities collected a lot of things, put him in jail, under the suspicion of, rape, human trafficking, and forming an organized crime group. So, and that's quite serious. That's a lot of years in a Romanian prison. And then they went through the phases, as they do in Romania, that the prosecution has to give a probable cause hearing to the court each month to extend the 30 days he has to the prosecution to bring the official charges. And they took that to the absolute limit, which was in the end of June. And then it was handed over to a magistrate of sorts who goes through the prosecution's case and see, is there enough to bring this to trial to a probable conviction? And normally that he has a 30 to 60 day limit. And as of today, there is no trial date. Now, they are semi-officially charged, but in European standards, the official charges isn't until the day of the trial. So that's the difference between US and European standards in this. You have the allegations, you have the suspicions, which is graded on a 3 to 5 grade scale. And if you are at the highest, you can be detained for a very long time. In Sweden, the longest who has been detained is 4.5 years before actual trial, when the official charges was. But this is the Romanian. As of the last news I have about it is that Andrew Tate wanted his assets released back to him, and that was denied, and that was just before Christmas. And at the beginning, there was a lot of stories out and alleged testimonies out in press, which made me believe, okay, this might be quite a strong case. But the longer it gets, the weaker it seems. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on in Romania at the moment. In my opinion, should he be still in house arrest? No, because every time limit the Romanian judicial system has put on themselves to bring things to a trial has passed for months, and they still keep him in house arrest. And that's quite hard for me to sit here and say, because I genuinely don't like the guy. But I have to detach that part of myself to the actual judicial problem here.
Why don't you like him?
He runs the most effective pyramid scheme since Amway.
Does he? It's a pyramid scheme?
Yeah, there's a university, whatever it's called, where people pay in. And
Hustlers
then the
University.
Then the more people you bring in, the more chance you have of getting more money out of it, kind of thing.
Well, that's a fair gripe. I mean, I'm not saying it's accurate, but I'm saying is Eric looks confused.
In my opinion,
no. His comments, I think, alone. If he's joking, that's one thing, but they're really not that funny when he brags about how he, I guess the colloquial word is pimp. I mean, he literally has video after video after video after video out there talking about how he uses women and tricks men and takes money from men from interactions with women. Again, I can't say that they're definitive, but there's not many people I like who make those comments on a regular basis. I've never heard Nate sit there and release this kind of thing on a video. So I don't know. I think that if they're meant for humor, that's one thing. I don't find it funny. Maybe it's somebody else's humor. But
only reason why I got to disagree with you is because I went through this crazy Cardi B case, and I was shocked to hear that she really didn't use drugs, and she really wasn't this woman who sleeps with a lot of men, and she was a good old girl. And when she was sued by Tasha K, she was like, "I'm saying all this stuff because it makes me money." And I was like, wow.
I only play the role of a hoe.
Yeah, and she proved it in court. Look, it was only a role, and now this woman's paying her $5 million. She's like, that's not me. So
that's a Marilyn Manson defense too.
Which, by the way, you have to ask yourself. You have to ask yourself when someone's playing that role, how much it's defamatory to actually say, "Hey, I bought her role playing."
Yeah,
like how defamatory is that? I mean,
it wasn't the issue that was defamatory is because they actually proved to Tasha K that was all, everything that she was saying was false. Like they went and actually showed her the evidence, proved it to her, had a conversation with her. And then then because it was like a big story, she just went with it anyway. And then that's when she sued it. She was like, no, I told her. I literally told her, and we went through it. She said, and they had him on tape. But even amongst that, I'm thinking the Andrew Tate thing, when people say he says all these nasty things, I'm thinking that could be his role. Like we're saying, this is what makes him his money. Okay. And the multi-level marketing stuff, I do agree. I was like, yeah, that's crazy. But I think we have to sometimes understand, him saying that stuff, I think is more of a branding issue rather than it may not just be what he actually does. Now, he could actually do it, but I'm thinking because that's what he says. He says this is how I make my money, being the master pimp or whatever.
Okay, well, Nate, I'll grant you all that. I'll say it's completely true. It's completely false. It's all just a role that he's playing. How's the world benefiting from this role?
Yeah, but here's the thing: everything you can say and will be used in the court of law.
He's playing the role of the guy.
Just like every rap star that I know.
That's fair point.
Well, I think they're offensive too. So
yeah,
I mean, I just
playing the role of the heel.
They lock them up, except you're in Georgia. They're locking them up.
Yeah, right.
That'll be coming up too. But no, again, that's why I said if it's humor, then that's fine, whatever. But people are saying, why don't I like? Why doesn't somebody like the guy? Well, I don't think he's a net positive. You see, I think Jordan Peterson is a net positive, as an example. So if I'm going to compare the two, because people do like to compare them, by the way, it's not just me. Comparing Jordan Peterson to Andrew Tate, I think one of them has a toxic message, in my opinion, now be Andrew Tate, and one of them I think has a decent message, especially for young men. Both are attractive to young men. I personally think that one message is healthier than the other. That's just my opinion.
No, and that's fair. The reason I was asking the question, it wasn't to be controversial, or I really wanted. I've heard so many mixed opinions on Andrew Tate.
Yeah, Joe being non-controversial.
I'm just wondering. I haven't seen very much.
I'm just asking questions.
I haven't seen very much of his content at all. In fact, we have seen little clips here and there, which I know are going to be pre-selected, designed to make him look like he's monstrous. So I'm a little sus on that.
Sure.
The longest I spent listening to him at all was when I was reviewing a Twitter space he was on with Elon Musk when Alex Jones came back, and in that exchange I was just like, I just found him grating. Like, that's a personal taste. Like, I personally found him grating. His whole persona just seemed very. There was a lot of things that, to me, on a personal level, just felt grating. I was just wondering, so the hustler okay. I was just wondering, like, once Nick expressed a disdain for him, I was just wondering what the source of that disdain was. But it wasn't like I was like trying to cast judgment or to say like, no, how dare you come after my guy.
Yeah. But other things is that when you see all his Twitter quotes of this and that, I've heard most of them already in other shapes and forms. He is very good at collecting these semi-pseudo-intellectual quotes and then putting them out on Twitter and social media. Mm-hmm. I've heard most of them because I'm over the age of 25. And so he's not dumb at all. He's an extremely clever guy who found a niche that made him hundreds of millions of dollars. So he's a clever guy. But the way I don't mind him earning money. It's the way he's earning money.
Right.
And this through Hustler University, in my opinion, pyramid scheme, and borrowing quotes all the time. Yeah, I just rubs me the wrong way.
Okay. No, I just the other, because I find him to be very intriguing in the sense of that he's so controversial, and I was just like, I'm loath to just categorize someone as being evil, especially when people who I completely distrust are telling me I should be categorizing him as evil, because I sort of feel as if they can say that by anyone, and eventually there are going to be people, if they're not already people, who will say the same thing about me without.
First they came, Alex Jones. Yeah, I get it.
Exactly. So that's why I was wondering, whenever someone expresses an opinion, especially on him, I'm always like, all right, well, why do you think that? So anyway, I'm still in the air. I'm still in the air on him, and I think I'll always be there. But I just happen to like listening to him just gives me a headache. Like that's.
Hey, can I present something to you guys? This is all right. First, I don't want you to be shocked that this is not going to get this thing demonetized. This is a major.
That happened, by the way. So thank you.
This is a major motion picture that's coming out, but I want to get what you guys feel about a couple of seconds of this trailer. Now, please don't hate me, chat. I'm talking to the chat first because the chat are maniacs. Don't hate me, maniac chat. Okay, I'm gonna play this thing. It's gonna be a couple of seconds. Don't hate me, but I want to get everyone's opinion about this thing. So check it out. Here it is. You guys ready?
Oh boy.
Oh, I saw this.
Watching you walk through a room full of white people was the most painful thing I've ever seen.
Excuse me. Sorry.
I want to take you to a job interview.
There's a recruiting class starting right now, and we got to get you in it.
Welcome to the American Society of Magical Negroes.
I don't really understand.
Okay. I've heard the name, and I don't know enough about it personally, so I haven't come up with any opinion. I've heard the term before, or the phrase before, used sarcastically, but I don't know enough about it.
Eric, I understand. You try to be PC. Listen.
That looks funny as hell, man.
I don't know. It could be hilarious.
Listen. I'm here with a whole bunch of black
barbershop part.
I'm here with a whole bunch of black people, right? We was in poker yesterday. That came up. And even the black people was like, yo, Nate, that's some racist shit.
Damn.
Like, that is some racist shit. Who the hell now, I'll even tell you how racist they think it is. They think it's now become a goddamn conspiracy that they put stuff like this out because white people are afraid to say, listen, you went too far. And then because Hollywood is so woke that they'll put something like this out, it fails, and then it facilitates the whole, hey, black people can't, make a good movie because it fails. But when you put something out like this garbage, black people don't want to watch it. And the same thing happens with Hollywood. They put out all this woke stuff that we all know is going to fail, and then put these minority and women to make it. And then when it does fail, it just continues that stupid cycle instead of putting out something that could work. And that's what this movie is going to fail. This movie is going to fail.
Am I reasonable in predicting that the director, producer, and perhaps writers of this movie are all black?
Oh yeah, but I'm thinking what happens is
yeah, but I was just going to point out like the issue, like if the producer, director, and writers of this were white, I imagine that Hollywood would be having a different reaction to literally the exact same movie.
Yes.
So if it was shot for shot, literally exactly the same, but the people who wrote it, directed it, and produced it were white, right? That would be a problem. But if they're black, it's okay.
Well,
which makes no logical
using
sense.
Nate's argument, I'm sure that that white people will still be blamed for it, and if they're not directly, it'll be internalized racism, or they'll say it's the Larry Elders of the world who put it out, or something. I don't know.
Nate, does this trailer show the one with the white tears meter? Because that part, when I saw that, I was like,
I could play more of the trailer.
I was say, like, that's the part where I was watching. I'm like, this is like a conspiracy meant to like, this is almost like a false flag psyop the way it's being written.
Literally, everybody's like, this has got to be a setup. They're like, this is a setup for it to fail. There's no way.
Yeah, like the rest of this is just even worse.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane.
Yeah.
Here it is. The American Society of Magical Negroes.
Sorry.
Nate, pause.
Yeah. I have never heard of this, but I get this. Has everybody loves Mel Brooks, right? Or most of us do. And in one of his movies, The Springtime for Mr. Austrian Painter, they had this musical that was supposed to be so bad as a tax write-off.
Yes,
and
producers.
It became a hit instead.
We call the producers. Yeah, we call the producers.
Yeah.
It's the name
So
of the show.
is this just a humorless version of it?
I don't think so.
No, this is their attempt. They think I'm smart and cerebral. This is me trying to be smart and funny on top of it all.
Oh
no, this is an active attempt. I have a feeling.
I mean, how can any white person go see this movie? It's like, even if you said to your friends, yeah, I went to see the movie, and you gave them the title.
Kurt, it's
How do you not
premiering
get
at
hate?
Sundance. How many black people do you think are going to be there?
Well, you could spot him from a satellite in Sundance.
Key and Peele have a
Yes, they do, and it's fucking hilarious.
But if you're white, how can you even say the title, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to that movie, The American Society of People.
Yes.
Well, is this Key and Peele?
No.
We already have an American society of those people. It's called NAACP.
Okay, I don't know. I mean, I literally, I just heard the name.
But yeah, if you watch the rest of that trailer, it's like it almost
cringe.
becomes a mockery of itself.
Yeah, it's pretty cringe.
Got to get you in it.
Welcome to the American Society of Magical Negroes.
I don't really understand.
It's easier to say.
What's the most dangerous animal on the planet?
Shark.
White people, when they feel uncomfortable. White people feeling uncomfortable precedes a lot of bad stuff for us. That's why we fight white discomfort every day. Because the happier they are, the safer we are.
The name needs a little updating, maybe.
Now, I'm going to say it. Reverse the races here. Could you make that movie?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, that also just reinforces the concept that black people are enslaved to whites.
For like 50 years of movie making, they made that movie a bunch of times.
Yes. They made that movie is called Reefer Madness.
Reefer Madness. Yes. But I don't think you can reverse, because the problem is that I understand. I think the issue that we're going with to now is bad things happen to, obviously, the horrors of slavery, the horrors of Jim Crow, all that stuff happened. But I don't think you make it better by doing the reverse to the other side, right? It's like, and I think this is kind of like almost revenge type thing versus let's get over this together type thing. It's like now there's a vengeance piece to it.
But why is this not just satire? This is just attempting to take something that is really a bad phenomenon that's kind of gross and make it so absurd that you can see how funny it is. Like, isn't that a healthy way to process?
Like Tropic Thunder. Tropic Thunder with
Blazing Saddles.
Yeah.
Blazing Saddles.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna Do the Right Thing is gonna be a funnier movie than this will ever be. Like, listen how bad it is. It's trying to be serious, and it's just, watching the trailer is so cringe, and I just
we should all go on opening night. We should all go on opening night, and then we can have a watch party discussion afterwards. It'll be great.
No, well, my shock was that the people, like, being in almost like a barbershop environment, because we were at a poker house, to see the visceral reaction to it by the people who I think of more are this thing, because it was almost uncomfortable, the title and the way it was going about, and they were saying it was, and I was like, wow, I was like, you guys really think so? And it wasn't looking, because I think in today's environment, everything is trying to be so protected, and now it's kind of like, this is, you're putting this in this type of environment. It's like you can pick on certain groups, you can't pick on certain groups. I understand, it's kind of got that feel to it. So
good point. And back my same point with Tropic Thunder, though. Like, if this was 2008, like you were just saying, would this just be another movie coming out, or is it a response of now? Because this is one of those where it's like, yeah, it looks cringe in the trailer, but I kind of want to step back and go, what is the whole movie? Do they make fun of themselves? Now, I did watch Barbie last night, slept through a good chunk, but it was bad, in my opinion. But
I liked Barbie.
Well, of course you did, Nate. I know. So you're winning your feminine credentials there.
You liked when the Chads took over.
I thought it was just a little much, but it doesn't matter. The Tropic Thunder, if you put parts of that out as a trailer right now, oh boy.
Yeah,
Robert Downey Jr.
Robert Downey, or even Ben Stiller. Remember when he was playing the? You see, we can't even say the words.
The
on
mentally
YouTube.
Challenged person. Yes, they and Robert Downey Jr. for
you know how to say that word? I say it all the time.
Yeah, please don't hear.
Yeah,
I've already had one stream not only demonetized but removed, and I've got a warning on the channel. So.
Really? Was it me? Was it
no,
me?
It was Viva Fry. Thank you very much. It was Viva Fry. from 2 weeks back.
YouTube must not listen to me then ever when I do a live stream.
Oh man! Well, they just opened up the word CP too, so now you can say.
What if I say it like a Bostoner, so you don't hear the R, the second R?
Well, you already sound that way with the Jersey.
So there you go.
Well, you're halfway there with good logic.
Yeah,
logic.
Yeah, logic.
I don't know, Nate. I mean, it's really hard. And is it a time issue? You're right, though. It's like this movie being released now. Obviously, Blazing Saddles. No way.
Oh no, Blazing Saddles can't be released now. No, of course not.
But I'm offended that they can't be released. I actually want
problem.
More of this.
I mean, when we had to yank Gone with the Wind, because we don't like how black people are depicted in it. I mean, there's a problem with the arts right now, I gotta say.
Or food. Don't buy Aunt Jemima, which is now what is it? Pearl.
Yeah. I still wonder if you could do Django Unchained, even though that was only a couple of years ago, with Samuel L. Jackson's role that he played.
Well, what's his name took some? They took some heat for that, for the N-word.
Yeah, Tarantino did.
Got too sensitive because I still remember the skit from Saturday Night Live with Chevy Chase and Richard Pryor.
Yeah, Dead
That
Honky.
was hilarious, and that was on network TV. But but now we live in a different time. I believe. I think so.
All right. Well, Kurt, you said that you had a case that you wanted to talk about. A Pearl Milling Company. Thank you for. Anything else? If you want Aunt Jemima, folks, if you want the savory taste, I'm sorry, I'll get right back. Pearl Milling Company is the new Aunt Jemima soup. Go ahead, Kurt. Sorry.
Yeah, just a fun story. I thought, just to liven the move. Florida man. Florida man comes in many forms. This particular Florida man just came in a particularly fun form. So this Florida man goes into a Bass Pro Shop and he picks up a fishing net from the rack. And then he proceeds to go to the Bass Pro Shop pond or whatever that's inside the store and uses said fishing net to catch a fish and then walks out of the store with said fish. And so I just think that's hilarious.
Well, he's kind of testing it ahead of time.
I want to know if he has a fishing license and how that operates into this in relevant Florida law. That's what I want to know.
Oh my God. I so want to do that now.
Yeah.
Or go to Cabela's and bowfish. Get a ball off their back.
So what was he arrested? Were there results? Was he fined? What?
Last I heard, they were on the search for the man. They were on hunt for the male. He removed a 50-pound live tarpon fish.
Tarpon's good eating.
Wow.
Too.
That's a good net. I want to know who makes that net.
Right?
I want to know where was security at. That's a pretty heavy haul right there.
I'm impressed he landed that without a winch.
They generally don't. Well, I mean, there's not like at Bass Pros, they generally don't have like security there. I mean, they have some loss prevention guys, but I'm sure nobody saw this and was like, oh my God, what's this guy doing? Because nobody
put the screen. Put up the screen, Eric. Put up the screen, Eric. Put up the screen.
It's kind of hard to put that alarm thingy on a fish.
Wow.
There he is.
He's got his hat
on. He's got his hat on. And we got the thing from Crime Stoppers. It's fishing for a trip to jail. Ha, ha, ha. And here he is with his hat and stuff. He and a friend went to Bass Pro located in Gulf Center Drive last night, grabbed a fishing net from the shelf, and removed the 50-pound fish from the fish tank. Also unclear whether or not the fish is also a bee, but that will have to wait for another time. He then carried the Silver King still inside the net and left the store in an unknown direction.
Well,
fantastic.
There is more than one king right there, and we're looking at him.
Well, if this is California, it might fall under $1,000, so that would be legal.
As the as the theoretical judge in this case, I think I'd just say just dismiss because of the lulls. Can I do that? I think I can.
But is it theft or fishing without a license?
I don't know what it is.
I think it's a private. It's like a private fishing tank though. So I wonder if that counts as. Would that be applicable to have a fishing license?
Oh, there's video. There's video.
Oh my gosh,
more screen time.
Okay.
Hold on. I have to find out I have to figure out where the start is on this thing.
Well, it is property. Right. I mean, I don't know how much it costs to have that fish. I imagine it's not $10. It's not a goldfish.
Well, no, but tarpon's like like trophy animal type of fish you go for out in Florida. A 50-pound one's not like that's a big fish, but like there are tarpons that get big enough like you have to strap yourself into the chair while you're fishing.
This is
on
a
a
good
boat.
point. What if he's an animal rights activist? But then again, did the fish survive this?
Yeah.
So how does that work out?
Put the screen back up.
All right. All right.
Let's watch this fish theft occur. There he is. He's got his fish.
And there's the tank you got it out of.
Oh, bro, dude, get away from me.
Lol.
Oh,
That's
I
pretty
honestly,
bold.
if I saw that happening, I'd assume it's part of like a TV prank or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was meant to be there.
Good point. Waffleganger saying that's not 50 pounds. It does look a little lighter than 50 pounds.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
Look, Dirty Eric.
Well,
So
hey.
upset. Hey, watch that chat. Nobody
look,
said anything about
guys.
Nate.
guys, if the fisherman can lie about the fish being yay big, then so can the police in the Bass Pro Shop. That looks like a 50-pound fish.
The police
to me
are
if I
allowed to
ever saw
lie.
one. If I ever saw one, 50 pounds, it was this big.
Yes, the police officers, based on my training and experience of telling lies, I can lie about that fish.
No, here's my conspiracy theory is that they calculated the value of the fish based on the price per pound, and they needed it to be 50 to be able to elevate it to like the next serious level of theft.
Wow, that's a criminal defense lawyer right there.
It could be. I wonder if that will come up in the trial then, Andrea, if there is one of like, no. Well, can we
Litigate the
look at the
hell out of the
video
weight of
and
that fish.
determine
Right
the actual fish weight based on the strain?
Well, you could say right now he's off the hook. So
Oh,
Throw him out.
that's true. We do need our own Florida man here to discuss this, but
We don't know where Viva is. Maybe he was an accomplice during this. We have no idea.
that's true.
No.
Sadly, he's sick because he was doing what is it, like a
Jumping in the
polar
water.
bear driving? Yeah, I guess if there's a frozen lake, David's got to jump in it.
I mean, Viva Fry has done fishing using a drone
He has
famously.
Yes.
So why not? Yeah, it was Viva. He's the man behind it all. He's the mastermind.
You got to share that with him because obviously he needs to cover that story.
Yeah.
yeah. Depending on the
Anybody
county, can Steve Gosney be on the case?
Oh, yes,
Maybe.
possibly. Only if it's a capital punishment issue, though. I think.
Yeah.
Our defense is that it was really, really funny.
Yeah.
That's a perfectly good defense
Ladies
to
and
me.
gentlemen of the jury, just look at this video. Like, just look at it again.
I mean, that would be a great thing to have a jury sitting there for, because it's, some jurors can be like, oh my gosh, I'm here for like a murder or something. What did this guy do? He stole a fish from Bass Pro. You're going to get a lot of jurors who are going to be very, very upset that they're stuck there.
Wow. Okay, I've got a bunch of locals tips that came in I didn't even realize. So I'm going to run through these. Entry required. Mr. and Mrs. Entry required. It's funny because they sign off on their name, so that way they use the same account, and I never know who's talking. So they'll sign off Mr. Entry required if it's a husband, or Mrs. Entry required if it's the wife. And I believe they are in Sweden. And is that where you are, Nick?
Yes, I am.
All right, yeah. Entry required is an expat from New York who lives in Sweden. I believe his wife is Swedish, but.
Okay.
They let me know Mr. and Mrs. Entry required are both here present and accounted for, wishing all in the chat a happy new year and thanking me and all the legal panel for the insight and knowledge that they generously provide us every week. Al Forkbeard said, question. This is interesting. This is almost more for a Freeform Friday, but we can go into it here a little. Vivek Ramaswamy has stated on camera words to the effect that the Rhino establishment will do whatever they have to ensure that President Trump does not become the Republican candidate for the 2024 presidential election. I think he's correct in that assessment. What can be done to thwart?
I saw Maine yesterday. Secretary of State published a memo saying, "Yeah, we're kicking him off the ballot." So Maine adds their fuel to the fire. So that's fun.
Yeah,
The Supreme Court's been asked to review this case by Colorado, I think they gave him till the 4th. Not a lot
I think
of
he's
time,
on the
but
ballot in Colorado.
He
again.
is on the ballot by the court's own order. So the Supreme Court of Colorado said, well, if it's appealed, then it's on stay. So they don't necessarily have to do anything with it. But what the problem was now with Maine doing it, it's like, because you have assuming you have the same time problems in Maine, right? Or roughly thereabouts. I mean, I don't know when their certification deadline is, but it can't be too far off. So you basically run into the exact same problem.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd say this, but to his credit, Gavin Newsom came out against it and said, we win at the ballot box.
Yeah, here's the thing. Something that's baffling to me is this, why they are pulling out of the ballot is something that he allegedly did in Washington, D.C. No civil suit or criminal charges, no conviction. How can they I simply don't get it.
That's why they've been using the term insurrection for 2+ years. There's a reason for this. Do you think they came up with this idea today? They're like, hey, let's remove them from the ballot. Or do you think that there may have been a strategy the whole time to make sure that word is used over and over and over and over and over and over? And then that gives a license for some activists, Secretary of States, et cetera, to say, hey, 14th Amendment, what is this? Go ahead, Nate.
But insurrection is actually a criminal charge. I think it's 2383 in Title 18, if I remember correctly.
It is. It basically
so it is
says
actually a criminal charge.
Law.
Yeah. And so, he hasn't been charged with that.
Right.
Trump has never been charged with that.
Insurrection is 18 U.S.C. 2383. You're correct. He's never been charged with it. In fact, to my knowledge, I don't think any of the defendants in the J6 trial were charged.
No, just seditious conspiracy.
Yep. Yeah, just conspiracy.
Which is one of the things when I was having debate last night with a lefty about this, that just makes it very perplexing as to how he could be guilty of inciting something that no human has been charged with committing. I mean, that's kind of bizarre. Joe,
it's not political.
I don't believe the term insurrection was designed for this. I think I disagree with you on that, Eric. I think that the term insurrection just makes it sound is a nice term that's different from racist and just sounds really evil and must be quashed. And there's a lot of benefits to the left in throwing that term around repeatedly.
Hold on. You don't think that Marco lies?
Slow down a second. I'll just make my point.
All right.
I'll make my point. The point is that all these different the fear and danger of the Trump followers being labeled insurrectionists gives now an opening for all sorts of remedies that are needed in order to quash these people who are basically, when you hear insurrectionists, it harkens back to the Civil War rebels, and basically makes you think of racists who basically wanted to enslave black people, and it makes you think of people who need to be suppressed. So whatever we do to punish these people, that's to protect America from a threat within. And all this domestic increased rise of domestic terrorism. I don't think that the term insurrectionist has been bandied about for the purpose of keeping Trump off the ticket. I think it was bandied about for the purpose of suppressing folks like you and me, or others who perhaps are a little bit more significant in the size of their microphone, and countless people who have little to no microphone, and to chill them by basically saying we're going to come down hard on you. So I don't think it was specifically with an expectation of we're going to use that now secretaries of state are going to use this. I don't think that was necessary. It may have been part of the plan. I don't think that's the primary.
I choose to give them more credit than you do, I guess. Two things can be true at once. Yes, it's about suppressing a lot of the people who are supporting Trump. Absolutely. But you cannot tell me these are some brilliant strategists. Whatever side you're on, I always think you should give credit where it is due. And I'm sorry, Mark Elias is a sharp cookie, These people know their strategy. They are far better at it than the Republicans. I'm sorry. The Republicans haven't had a Lee Atwater since the 80s. Even Karl Rove in early years was a little bit better than this, but the Republicans are sleeping, letting this kind of thing go on. And the terminology is very specific. We've seen it over and over and over. You've seen it with Hillary Clinton and Dark. You've seen it again and again and again. And having loaded terminology that is seeped into the public consciousness helps not only for them to take actions like to keep them off the ballot, but to help with polling, where a lot of the American public is saying, I agree, he shouldn't be on the ballot.
Right,
but I think it's together. It's a full
in general. It helps Democrats in general to say that the large faction of the right are insurrectionists. So it just helps rally the troops together. There's so many different benefits to using that term repeatedly. I'm simply saying that to say that this was why I wouldn't pin it to this. But I think if this is a semantical difference, I think we're all in agreement that they've been using this term repeatedly, despite a lack of any charges, for political gain, and this is certainly one of those potential political gains. So I don't think there's much benefit to you and I, having a lengthy discourse as to whether this was the primary motivation or not.
I'm saying push back a little bit on you, Joe, because I want to support, I think, what Eric is saying about the strategy here, which is what I see as a massive flipping of the script by the left wing with the use of insurrection. Because before January 6th, when you heard about insurrection, you were hearing it in the context of the Insurrection Act and Posse Comitatus. Use my Latin today. Posse Comitatus, right? The idea of using the military to come in and shut down these protests that are happening in places like Ferguson and California, and these violent, Berkeley, these violent protests that people are perceiving are getting out of hand. That kind of criticism was coming from the right wing for quite a long time before this ever came up in the context of January 6th. So I'm kind of with Eric here in that I see, this language has already been out there and it's already been used for political purposes. They just found a way to flip a script on it to make it a very powerful weapon.
But my point is the
chop was pretty good for
my point
using
is that the term insurrectionist has not been exclusively bandied about or even primarily bandied about, with an expectation that in 2023 secretaries of state will be able to use Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to keep him off. I will agree.
I think they are.
What?
It's happening too rapidly, too coordinated. They absolutely are, in my opinion.
Oh, I think it's definitely intentional now at this point. I think Baud and Paulson, the quote unquote scholars of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, who probably never heard of it as of January 5th, 2021, but now are considered to be far more preeminent scholars than, I don't know, Chief Justice Salmon Chase, who actually weighed in on it in 1870.
Who was the Chief Justice during the Civil War, and when they were circuit riding, was literally one of two judges who was literally conducting the trial of Jefferson Davis.
Yeah.
So he might know something about the Civil War. I'm just guessing.
But
and the 14th Amendment.
Think that he's totally wrong. Totally didn't know what the hell he was talking about. They got a much better handle on it, and they've been deemed by now the Colorado Supreme Court and apparently some administrative hearing by the Secretary of State. And I do want to talk about the distinction with you all, to talk about, like, this is just like the next level down. Soon we're basically gonna have like a tribunal of 3 members of the DNC.
They'll be the random election judge at every precinct. That'll be good.
This wasn't even a real trial. This was an administrative hearing, which the Secretary of State herself conducted for the purpose in Maine, for the purpose of keeping him off the ballots. Which this was like so much in the dark. I mean, I don't know. I'm not aware of this being streamed.
Yeah, I never heard of it. Yeah,
I didn't know anything about this. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, here's a decision, a 34-page decision.
Yeah,
the Secretary of State.
Not only
I was like, my first thought was like, the Secretary of State issues decisions. What the hell is that?
And she's not even an attorney. She has like a bachelor's in capitalism and environmental sustainment, which sounds like
she's a bachelor's in capitalism. She must be a blatant right wing.
Right wing. Yeah. Yes, she's not a fan of gulags. Certainly.
Oh.
But no, I just like, I'm not saying that being a lawyer is enough, but for her to make legal findings and conclusions of law, and it's like, not too sure you're making those accurately there. But yes, she literally copied and pasted the entire reasoning from Colorado. And that's all they needed. They needed the one, and now it's just going to get copy and pasted until the Supreme Court says stop.
I mean, from my perspective, when it hits Wyoming, I'll be concerned. Okay, but Maine, who cares? Maine is not going Trump anyway.
No, Andrea,
I think Maine won.
Andrea,
he won one of the electoral votes in Maine.
No, hold on. It's not only about Trump, and a lot of people are forgetting it. There are Congress people in these states who ride the coattails of Trump, and that can force them to lose seats. I know for a fact, I believe there's a senator in Maine who's a Republican, last time I checked. And in Colorado, there's at least a couple Republican congresspeople like Boebert who's having to find another district for herself, and there could be others. So a lot of this, I think, is strategy. You get him off the ballot, you get the voter. Well, why am I going to go vote? My guy's not on the ballot. While I'm there, I'm not voting for a congressperson. So there's farther reaching effects than just keeping him off the ballot.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the legal distinction, at least from the Colorado Supreme Court, and how they sort of defy their own distinction, if I can talk about this for a second. Because the Colorado Supreme Court...
push back on what Andrea just said, because I vehemently disagree with this. I know that traditionally there are dozen states that everyone assumes is blue before they count 6 ballots. That everyone's like, oh yeah, that's definitely going blue. That's definitely going blue. And we know we see them like California, New York, and a lot of people would assume that perhaps Maine falls into that category. I vehemently disagree with this. The reason we have these freaking elections, is because you don't know. There's a lot of states that we don't know. I'll tell you that with the uprise from people who are angered by the way this is handling, this has been handled by secretaries of state, by these courts, by these different judiciary decisions to try and find some way to keep them off the ballot through these different prosecutions by Jack Smith. There has been a developing outrage, and I want to see Trump win 40 states, okay? States that no one ever thought was in play, because people are so disgusted and outraged by the way that the left is so desperate to actually keep him from running. They're so terrified of him that they say Americans should not have the choice as to whether or not they have him. I think Americans are outraged. I think the more that these prosecutions continue, the longer they continue, I think it helps him politically. And no, I don't want to give a stinking inch and say, oh, we never would have won Maine anyway. I know you're probably right. Is he probably going to win Maine? I probably not. You would historically he wouldn't, but I'm not giving it a freaking inch. I wouldn't give California. I wouldn't give Washington. I wouldn't give Oregon. I wouldn't give New York. I wouldn't give Illinois, not Hawaii, or any of these other stupid states that are so blinded to leftist politics that they're just like, oh, blue no matter who. I'm not giving an inch anywhere, and I don't think any of us should ever say, you know what, it's really a throwaway anyway, even if there was no down ballot impact whatsoever. That's just
okay. Fair enough. Back to Kurt, though. Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to just discuss the legal analysis the Colorado Supreme Court did, because they sort of defy their own analysis, and I thought it was worthy of bringing up. So on page 97 of the Colorado Supreme Court decision, they talk about the difference between an insurrection and a rebellion, and they sort of defy what their own rationale is. And let me just get to the right page, because I lost it as I was trying to look for something else. So it's on page 99. I'm sorry, not 97. They say, and they cite an authority that's a treatise on the subject from Westlaw. And they say insurrection is distinguished from a rout, riot, and offenses connected with mob violence by the fact that in an insurrection, there is an organized and armed uprising against authority or operation of government, while crimes growing out of mob violence, however serious they may be, and however numerous the participants, are simply unlawful acts in disturbance of the peace, which do not threaten the stability of the government or the existence of political society. And, and then they also say, in later parts of the decision, they say that Trump's tweets in the run-up to January 6th, these tweets were understood by his supporters as literal calls to violence, literal calls to arms, literal calls of war. And I'm like, well, if that is your premise, that the people literally understood him to literal calls to arms, literal calls to violence, they didn't bring them, though. There were no guns. There were no guns. by anyone. The only person that was charged with the gun, I think, was one random DEA agent who was involved in the riots, and he had a gun, but that's because he's a DEA agent. But yeah, it's like this is a mob, right? They're not particularly organized. There's no, some of the Proud Boys have been charged with seditious conspiracy, as we pointed out, but as the crowd as a whole, there's no real evidence of organization. There's no evidence of them arriving armed. To the extent they used anything that could be said to be arms, they were all things they found once they were there, like riot shields or batons or pieces of bike rack. They weren't things that were brought in advance. So like the Colorado Supreme Court defies its own definitional framework, because I'm like, well, I'm looking at this looks a lot more like a mob. Someone would decide to do something, and the crowd just erupts in a spontaneous way. It looks like a riot. I've called it a riot. I called it a riot when I did these cases back when I was doing my 50 long series of the Capitol riot series. I call them riots right out of the gate. And I'm like, but this is a riot, not an insurrection. And so, because if it was, presumably that it would have been organized, it would have been armed. Where are the machine guns? Let alone the pistols. Their own definitional framework doesn't make sense, but they still reach the conclusion it's an insurrection anyway.
Fair.
Yeah. The only comment I have as an outsider looking in is the United States is formed on a base of an insurrection of sorts, and the Constitution,
an actual insurrection.
an actual insurrection, and as such, in the Constitution, I mean, I'm not a constitutionalist, so tell me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the Constitution protect the citizens' rights to do it again if necessary?
No, Thomas Jefferson has colloquially made those comments about like the tree of liberty needs to be watered with blood every so many generations or so forth, but there's nothing in the Constitution itself that I would support overthrowing the Constitution.
No, overthrowing the government, not just, and maybe not the Constitution.
I hate being the screaming liberal, but I'm going to be the screaming liberal today. Damn it! That's my role here.
It's leftist, Nate.
Right.
I'm the union rep. Remember?
Thank you. Well, one thing I think you guys are. I think this is important. I think what California did was great, allowing him on the ballot. But I think you guys have missed the importance of it because they're disqualifying him from the Republican primaries.
Primary, right?
And he needs to win those states to win the primary. So even those liberal states like New York and stuff, he needs those votes to win the primary. Where I think he's definitely going to win the general election, but he doesn't need Maine for the general election, but he does need Maine to win the primary. So I think that's why this is important. So with that issue, the second is that I just don't. I understand you guys' arguments, which I'm just going to be honest with you. I agree with kind of wholeheartedly. Which kind of sucks for me to say. It really hurts, like Tony, for me to say that.
How are you screaming liberal, Nate? I'm confused.
But I do think that you guys have made it. It's not as clear as I think you guys have made it seem. Because I looked up like disqualifications with the 14th Amendment, and there were I think about 6 people who were disqualified under this section, and it's all wonky. Like one guy was disqualified from being sheriff because he was the Confederate. So but then, they did it inside of this, it was the commissioners who did it versus, then they went to court and the court said, well, we can't do it, whatever they say. So, and then like in North Carolina, they have a state law that says anybody's disqualified under the clause under the 13th Amendment, but who then decides that? And the courts say it's the people who, so it's so wonky state to state and who does it. I think right now, honestly, you need the Supreme Court to come down and say this is going to be the standard. And as of right now, based on the precedent, you have a lot of people who have gone this route, not for the office of president. I think the office of president argument is sound, right? Does this even apply to office of president or federal offices?
Yeah.
But for state offices, this has been done many times on the state level to keep people off of state ballots and to keep people out of state or state positions, and it wasn't. And when every time it's gone to court, that person is lost. And the term insurrection, which I do agree, it's horrible that it's not well developed. What is an insurrection? Because I agree with Kurt. January 6th was not an insurrection. It obviously was not, but they're playing it that way. And like Eric said, they've been saying insurrection all this time to get it ingrained in our heads. And I think that's wrong. But it seems like from the precedent, each state kind of gets to determine what that means to them. And the Supreme Court has not said, well, you know what, all this nonsense, this is what an insurrection is. So
yeah, well, the Supreme Court's probably not going to go out of its way to make that decision particularly clear when it's some random sheriff somewhere, right? Because
exactly.
It's like, we can't be bothered. But when it's the president of the United States, I think they might be bothered.
But what I mean by that is that we can't say that they don't have any arguments on the other side, because they're going to point to all this precedent that, hey, look, this has happened before. The states have done this before. These are the times, and it's always been upheld under state law. This is the state law, and blah blah blah. And it's never been. But now, and then they're going to say, well, obviously, he wants to be on our state ballot, and we're going to do it that way. But don't get me wrong. I want to be very clear. I agree with you guys' arguments. I think this is all BS. But I'm just saying, it's just like with Roe v. Wade. I agree with the right to abortion, but I think the ruling Roe was just a bad ruling. The same thing here. I agree with you guys' points, but I think they have an argument, and I think they have some precedent to back up their argument. Even though you guys may not think it's strong, I think they're going to say we have, this has happened before in the past on these other positions, and it's been upheld.
Yeah, that's some weak sauce, man. I'm just saying that's some weak sauce.
All right. Well, you again. I'm saying it happened before. Here are all the examples. You're saying, well, it's it shouldn't happen this, but then you have no precedent, right? So I'm leaning on the precedent, and the other side I think is not has no precedent to lean on. Just what's an insurrection? I
will happily take the no precedent side over their weak ass precedent and argue that one, no problem.
If I can, I have to leave in a minute because I have my own stream, and I'm covering the. I'm almost scared to say the name of the case because it's a lesbian couple with toy boy and woman ending up in a ditch. It's called Texas v. Dykes.
As in a ditch. The dike is the ditch, right?
No,
Dyke is presumably the guy. It's their name. That would be the person's name. Their name is
Dykes is the defendant.
Okay.
Their name is Dyke.
I was going to say a dike is also a cut into the ground too. So negative term.
No.
Yeah,
she is a lesbian, and her name is Dyke.
Yeah.
Well, we had a guy in New York called Wiener. Not everybody's well.
Yeah. It almost became there.
Yeah.
Also, aptly named.
Now, Steve Gosney, I leave off with this. If you steal a big fish from a fish tank, is that theft or is it fishing without a license?
In Florida.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Nick.
Hi, Nick.
Is that rhetorical?
No, not really. We're covering a case where Florida man went into a Bass Pro shop, took a net off the shop rack, then went to the Bass Pro shop pond, got out what they're calling a 50-pound fish, although we have dispute, and walked out the door with it. I think not guilty because hilarious, but we were wondering what you might think.
Well, I actually had a case of dealing with the theft of a fish, and it was a juvie case out of Flagler County. And these two kids, I tell you, they were such little pranksters, and you like you say, not guilty because of comedy. And these kids broke into a house, but then what they did is they took a dinner, like a boiling pot of water, dipped it into the fish tank and stole 2 goldfish, and then were playing with the goldfish on the lawn when they showed up. So, I mean, like you say, it was as a prosecutor, I prosecuted that case, and I was like, this is just
you really prosecuted that. You're a heartless man.
I actually dropped.
Those fish were loved members of the family, Kurt.
The problem was they went into the person's house. But the family was really cool about it. The family whose house was broken into, and the kids were kind of annoying, but they were really just pranksters. And I mean, so many things get criminalized now. It's like we have this over-aggressive criminal justice system. When you were a kid and you're growing up, you go on a thing, you throw rocks, you go in the railroad tracks, and I mean, kids have to be given room to breathe in our society. Yeah. Everything's so like, and the Karens were on the phone dialing. There's a bunch of teenagers out on the lawn. It's like not everything's criminal. Sometimes it's just kids growing up.
Yes.
But I'm still against defunding the police, though. I understand. I just want to make it very clear.
Depends on which
and I
police.
scream, don't defund the police. So yes, Steve is right.
Agree.
I was listening to a 911 call. I don't know when it was that it happened, so I don't know if it was recent. It might have been old. But this woman's calling 911 because her ex, who had already been abusive to her in the past, was out in front of her lawn and, making threats. And she calls 911, and the person says, well, we literally have no one to send you. Call the sheriff's office on Monday. It's like, yeah, but they're outside the door right now. And, well, we don't have anyone to protect you. Send. And at some point, I don't think it was on the call, but the ex broke in and sexually assaulted her and roughed her up. And it's just like, this is what happens when you defund the police, among other things.
But see, here's the distinction: is good cops are essential for a civilization, but bad cops are dangerous to our civilization.
Yeah.
So we really need to, have an independent judiciary, an independent prosecutor's office, judge cases individually, weed out the cops who are overly aggressive and not following the law. Same with the prosecutors, and reward cops who are doing the right thing and following the law, and teach that and spread that message out. And that's the solution. It's tough because it's not an easy global solution, but that's really, we need to always lean on the side of good cops and be against the bad cops, because it's a very dangerous position within our society.
I think the challenge, Steve, is that it's just so qualitative what makes a good cop, and it doesn't make for easy metrics that you can plug into a performance review to decide if this one's going to get shifted up to, the next level of law enforcement or whatever. It's just the bureaucracy running things.
And it's a societal-wide problem, is that you have, as our society becomes less connected to morality and more atomized and more politicized, those things get projected into our other institutions, such as police, prosecutors' offices, and all these institutions. Whereas we need to work on the individuals within the society over time, and that's a hard slog. That's not an easy answer, but that is the answer.
It is the answer. And the reason why I say it's the answer is because that's how it works in small town America still. Like, it's in the urban environments where the police are so completely separated from the people that they serve that, if you're not arresting somebody, you're not having contact with that person or their family or their associates or anything like that. The small town environment is so different when the cop who is arresting you is also the guy who coaches your kid's little league team. Like, you have a completely different dynamic in this type of community. So I don't know what the answer is to how to restore some of that to the urban environment, but it's, my personal feeling is that's really what's critically needed.
Perfect.
Yeah, they have what they call, I know in New York they started what's called PALs, police athletic leagues.
Yeah, we have PALs here. Yeah, PALs are awesome. They do a lot of boxing.
Well, I'll have an observation. When I was prosecuting in Flagler, I used to go and visit different things that would go on in the community to kind of get out of the office, because I think so many people, they get in their law school and they go in there like in their office and they see the world through their little computer screen. So I'd do one day a week or one day a month. I'd go outside the office, and I remember Calvin. What was his Deputy Calvin? What was his last name? Anyway, I went on a trip and we went to the Police Athletic League. They had the Carver Gymnasium in Bunnell, if anybody knows this, from Flagler County. And I went in there. It was this juvenile program that was put on. It was in the hood, right? And I was doing all the juvenile prosecutor for Flagler County, so I knew all the bad kids, right? And I remember I was looking at the list of the kids that came after school and went to this police athletic league and this Carver gym, and I'm looking at the names, and I told Calvin, Deputy Calvin, I'm like, I don't recognize any of these people. And he's like, exactly. So the fact is that, the idle mind is the devil's playground. And here was an institute, and it was a small town. Bunnell's a small town. And the kids that weren't involved in the community, the kids that weren't participating, those are the ones that were getting away and getting involved in the criminal systems.
Well, I got to jump in really quickly. A slew of locals tips came in, during this, and I wanted to at least get through some of them. Unfortunately, some of them are for Nick, who left, so don't know. But entry required said, I cannot fathom EricHunley nor Kurt on civil law ever doing anything outside the law. I am, however, stockpiling popcorn and wondering when Sean, potentially criminal, is going to go berserk and be on the front pages. Entry card again. This is to Nick Starro. The biggest problem I have with the Swedish court system is that the common man does not have a clue as to what's going on in the Swedish court system. Another one, I remember almost 20 years ago, criminals shot up all the police helicopters in Gothenburg. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Shot up my local police station, which is now disbanded, and all of us were staggered and no information came forward. We're constantly left in the dark here in Sweden. Wow, a lot of interesting stuff. But,
I hate Sweden right now.
Sweden's getting the heat.
Therefore, all for the Innocence Project, but now more in favor of DNA tests on 3 to 4 decades of grape kits and murder kits. Crap on a cracker. EricHunley is demonetized in the first few minutes for no apparent reason at all. Who would have thunk? Entry required again. Nate the lawyer. I disagree with you on so many political points, but I call you an honest broker. I am a white person, and I am not, nor have I been afraid to speak my mind. I got rolled at the Simon and Garfunkel concert in Central Park and was too beat up to be at the Donna Summer concert the next weekend. We all should speak up regardless of the consequences.
Thank you.
Simon and Garfunkel mosh pit.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Mel Brooks lives in our spirit, but we cannot mention any of his words on YouTube. Very true. EricHunley, this is a nice way to wrap up the year. All the nicest and favorite people on your panel, and even a fellow Swede, although I'm actually a New Yorker. Good vibes all around. Best wishes to all of you, even down in Oz. Al Forkberg said, great discussion, thank you, but please mention the complicity of the rhinos in this disqualification scam. I sort of touched on it, but didn't completely, but I think we covered it. Entry required. Last one. I am a New Yorker living in Sweden for 20 years with a residence in Vermont. I am very angry at the political situation in America. I cannot fathom coming back home and taking up arms against my fellow Americans. I hate when extremists talk of civil war. I do not see it. And yes, please. Ballot boxes are a great place to protest. You put in a ballot and you vote for whatever you want. You donate money to the cause that you want. You carry a sign, anything, within legal parameters. And that's something I always stress is there are many ways to protest and many of them are legal. Please use all of those.
Hey, just a quick question. What do you guys think about all these polls that are coming out that saying the majority of Americans agree that Trump should be kicked off all the ballots? I think that's kind of scary.
I want to see what I want to get with Rich Barris on that and actually find the scores.
They haven't thought it all the way through, is what I think.
Because the Maine, I don't know if you saw, there was that poll that came out in Maine, supposedly, that said that Nikki Haley was like within 7 points of Trump, or a very low number. Another poll that was well respected said it was 37 points. So, and that was a YouGov well-known push poll. I think it was YouGov that was involved. So Rich Barris knows all the polls and different things, and there's some shady shit going on, if you will. And he has even said, this is the irony, over many recent years, typically said the bad polling has come from the left. This year, he said it's all coming from the right. It's coming from the DeSantis folks, the Haley folks. There are so many operators who are Republicans who despise Trump that they are actually causing havoc. So I would not, I'm not saying don't trust the polls, but, do the old Reagan, trust but verify.
When's the last time the polls were right?
Poll once every 4 years in November?
The poll is perfectly right as a snapshot of a point in time that is not at all relevant to the outcome of the election.
Yeah.
We haven't seen an accurate poll in 7 years.
No, I think some have been more accurate than others.
I mean, Rich Barris is pretty good. I'm not gonna.
Rich's polls are pretty good.
Rich is pretty good, but I'm simply saying that, like, look at the 2016 election, look at the 2020 election. All of them were polling in completely opposite ways. Look at the 2022 election. All the polls that we see, I'm very loath to trust them anymore. I feel like I've been burnt like a few times too many at this point for me to say, oh, this is what the polls are telling us, so we can have some sort of confidence in that.
Well, I would actually like something to come about where, I have different things in the crayons. What if you had like a score on all these commentators or whatever, like a reliability score or a reliability score on polls. I don't think it's a terrible thing. Like
who's deciding these reliability scores? This is Snopes.
No, you would take the polls and see the actual, right? Here's the polls, here's what actually happened, and score it. Yeah.
I don't think that's a terrible idea. It's like this poll is within 80% more reliable than that poll. They're actual hard numbers.
That's a really good point, Eric. It's like it's just standard quality control. Like any manufacturer would do that.
Yeah, and I would love to see that every time somebody pops up, like right in their name tag, the little stamp, instead of like a Good Housekeeping seal, because we have recency bias and we have things like that, which throw us off. It's like, holy shit, they were right about this thing that I care about. Never mind that they were wrong about the other 20 things. And by the way, this is people that I might agree with on the one thing.
But how are you going to weight your really good calls? Like, not all calls are equal, Eric. Like, I'm just here to say, okay, when I get my little Chiron, I called the Johnny Depp verdict. I want that one.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I know Nate wants to cry on.
At what point did you call it?
Before the trial. Because I was familiar, Joe. I had watched the UK process. I knew what was coming. That's why I called it.
It was you, Legal Bites, and who else called it? Colonel Coots called it. Like you guys are all on it. Yeah, they were like all on it. But I would even say, to your point, Eric, the polls that are saying Trump is winning and all this other stuff. It's like I don't want to get to the point where the polls that say what I like them to say, I agree with. The polls I don't like them to say what I question. Right. It's just like, you got to. I think you put them all in that basket and say,
agree.
We'll only know in
I always wondered what the relevance. Why is that information as a voter that I need? Why does it matter what the polls say about any particular candidate? I mean, it seems to me that
I don't think it matters for money. It matters for money, Steve.
Yes,
I think it matters to the media industry complex and for pushing and for maybe the political insiders. But as a voter, it doesn't educate me one hill of beans.
It does educate you for an investment, though. If you're going to invest in candidates, I'm just trying to be realistic here.
That's the political insider question. I'm talking about as a voter.
A voter is who gives money.
Yeah, the voter is the person who gives money. $10
Yeah.
Well,
but the thought process is also.
I have $20 to spend. I want to make sure that I spend my money, my $20, on the winner. The same way as
the thought process is also that polls become a self-fulfilling prophecy. That people when people are torn, they like feeling like they picked the winner. So there is a certain percentage, maybe that's the give or take in these polls, where people will just sort of flow toward who they anticipate is going to be the winner if they don't feel much of a distinction between the candidates. So I'll tell you right now, like, I'm when I see polling numbers on Vivek, who I happen to think I happen to think is probably one of the most intelligent politicians I've seen in a while. I see the polling numbers on him and I'm kind of astonished and a little bit discouraged. I would love for him to be, polling number 2 behind Trump, and he's certainly lagging rather than growing. And the polling numbers, will that bear out in the primaries and caucuses? I don't know.
Well, that's why I was talking about with Barris and confirming with what happened in Maine. That is trying to put the thumb on the scale, like you said, a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that's where you're going, Steve. So I get that too. But by saying Haley, look how close Haley is, let's get that momentum, because that's the way it typically goes into the primaries. Who has the momentum at the last minute? You'll see their numbers pop. 2008, remember John McCain went from carrying his bags around at the airport to all of a sudden he started to catch on in New Hampshire or whatever, and they didn't know if he was going to pull it out, but then whoop, at the end he went over the line because of that momentum. So they're trying to feed the momentum the other way, or at least some people are. And that's why I did mention that Bear said the weird polling is coming from the right now, because guess what? I could tell you who the nominee is for the Democrats. I'm pretty certain. I don't think there's any question.
Unfortunately.
And honestly, unless you're putting a thumb on the scale or manipulating things, we know who the nominee is for the Republicans by a large margin.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. It's going to be a really, really interesting year, actually. And probably a good point to wrap up on so we can be well rested to deal with the onslaught of politics and the Trump trials like Joe has coming over the year. So, Nate, what do you have coming up?
Just some more stories on my famous Dalton mayor. For those who don't know, Tiffany A. Hinyard. She's holding the town hostage, locking out the city council. She's very, very good people. Also, I got a video out on the first LGBTQ plus mayor in College Park. He just was arrested and is now doing 30 years in federal prison for something very naughty.
Gay?
Mayor.
No.
And then we have the Latino mayor first Latina mayor in New Mexico, who is sending gang members to threaten her political opponents. So we got a lot of good stories coming up. Good. And let's not forget, we have the Wheel of Fortune granny, who has just been arrested trying to go to Vietnam. What she was arrested for is she hired a contract killer to kill her son-in-law over a custody dispute. Yes, Granny did it. And she was on Wheel of Fortune. And the funny part about the Wheel of Fortune is her prize puzzle was Mischief Maker. And that she won.
She use Wheel of Fortune money to pay?
No. She didn't. They paid $100,000 to for the hit. And then they have her on FBI, the FBI code up and all that stuff. So these are so for those of you who don't know my channel, I like to cover interesting law crime cases and interesting cases with these political nut jobs around the country, and it gets crazy. So Nate the lawyer, you know where to find me.
Nice.
All right. And Kurt, what do you have going on?
On civil law is mostly on break right now because of the holiday season. He's just kind of chilling out, but we have been playing some Super Mario World gaming streams that have been fun. And we've also been doing a tier ranking of all the Star Trek Next Generation episodes. So we'll probably do some more of that. Also, in personal news, I'm moving to Houston in February. I signed a lease, so pretty excited about that. Me and Nate are going to be neighbors. It'll be fun, along with Attorney Tom. We'll have a little gang over there. It'll be great.
Congratulations.
All right. Yeah, no kidding. Andrea, what do you have coming up?
Oh, gosh. So I am pretty much exclusively on Twitter these days. I have not been very good on the making videos side of things, but I am, of course, continuing to follow the Brian Kohberger case. That's my, main interest. Slowed down, so there may or may not be anything at all to talk about in the next couple of months. We just have to kind of wait and see. Otherwise, I've just been kind of picking up stories as they come to me. One of the ones that I'm interested in right now is so this boxer, Andy Cruz. He was a Cuban Olympic champion, and he defected several years back to the United States. He's filed a lawsuit against his promoter that he signed with, who then turned around and basically sold him to a different promoter that he didn't want to work with and took a bunch of money for it. So Andy Cruz is suing this guy for a bunch of violations, including violation of the Ali Act, which is like one of this very technical and very bizarre pieces of legislation. Okay, you talk about insurrection isn't defined, and we argue about what insurrection is. The Ali Act is all based on being a promoter and being a manager, but at no point does it tell you what those things actually mean. Like where is the line drawn between this function and that other function? So it's a kind of interesting issue that the question is, did this guy violate the Ali Act by acting in a managerial role rather than as a promoter? So I'm going to be paying attention to that.
Cool. Steve, you haven't been here for a couple of weeks. So how many books have you written since the last time I saw you?
Yeah, I'm on hiatus. I'm on long-term hiatus, but I'm writing a fantasy novel. I actually get 3 parts. Oh, look, Trump. Yes, thank you. The Brucey, the One-Eyed Wonder Dog, is still available. All my books are still available at stevegosney.com, although I'm not even certain if I'm going to reorder the hardbacks or what's going to happen. I do have a coloring book, a Brucey coloring book that I'm going to self-fund just because I like doing it. And I've got a fantasy now. But these are all, I'm sort of back to I have nothing to promote. I am going to do a live stream on January 4th, Thursday at night. But I'm very much dialing back. I got another death case coming in. I've got to respond to the one I have. The first, DeSantis is getting real aggressive, and the first non-homicide death penalty case is in my jurisdiction. I'm not sure how that's going to impact. I'm advising on another big media case that I can't comment on that's in our office. So I don't know. I'm sort of on long-term hiatus, but thank you. I try to hop around when I can. Oh, and I'm going to be on Joe's channel I think I'm invited. I don't know.
Of course you are.
Okay, I haven't gotten a response about my time slot, but
yeah, I know because well, Vivo.
I know. And look, but I'm always happy to be on Joe's channel, so I'm looking forward to the big New Year's Eve stream with Joe. That's
right.
That's the big news. That's the great stuff.
All these folks, but we get there. Sean, you're next.
Yes, Sean.
Yeah. No. Sorry, I was changing this up. Just keep your eyes peeled. There's a couple things I'm trying to figure out what to do next video wise. But you always find me Thursday nights at 9:30. Always a fun time. You can find me on Locals, Twitter, Twitch, Rumble Kick, anywhere you want to, even here on YouTube.
Anywhere you want, based and badass.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and we typically wrap things up with Joe. So we're going to be wrapping up the year with Joe, where he's going to tell us where to find us. And, well, he'll have some words. I don't know if they'll be wise, but he'll have some words. It is Joe.
So New Year's is upon us. I plan on having a New Year's party, 6 hours, starting at 9 p.m. Eastern, going until 3 in the morning, so I can cover every American. Which, let's face it, that's the only New Year's anyone cares about. Every American New Year's. If you're lonely this New Year's, if you're sitting there with a loved one and want to like kiss a loved one at midnight, just the stroke of midnight, wherever that is in your part of the world, as long as it's in North America. So I urge you to join me. I plan on having a host of guests, a ton of people. Every person you see in this panel right now is certainly invited. And I plan on talking to them as soon as we get cut off here by EricHunley to have them on. I'm trying to stagger people so that they actually have their own little slot. That's preferable to me, rather because I feel like these panels, you don't really get the same intimacy because everyone has different thoughts at the same time. But I urge you all to make sure you join me on Sunday evening, starting at 9 p.m. And that's going to go until 3 in the morning. So that's the most pressing thing that I have coming up. As far as any final thoughts on the year and looking into 2024, the one thing that I think we should really fixate as to what 2024 is likely to be all about, from my perspective, is that it almost certainly is going to be a year which and look, you can look at this as a black pill, you can look at it as a white pill, you can look at it as a green pill. I don't care what kind of pill you're looking at it as. Frankly, I'll tell you right now, I happen to think that 2024 is a year that should terrify the bejesus out of every single one of you. I think